So he wanted to eradicate beliefs and customs that he held to be foreign to Islam. He's thinking Sufis here, right? And he wants to rejuvenate correct Islamic thought and all its related sciences. What he's thinking about there is one of the things the Abbasid Empire was really good at was science, astronomy, right, philosophy. Where did they get all this from? Aristotle. Aristotle was not a Muslim, right? He was a pagan. These are foreign sciences. And he wasn't so happy about that either. So you can see he's got a lot of issues going on in the records of the Abbasid Empire and trying to explain what happened. And I've got this one, it's not exactly a quote, but a description of him. The first 3 generations of Islam, the Salaf, were the best role models. Their practice, together with the Quran, constituted a seemingly infallible guide to life. Right? So the first 3 generations of Islam, the Salaf, were the best role models. Their practice, together with the Quran, constitute a seemingly infallible guide to life. This is important now. Any deviation from their practice was viewed as bid'ah, or innovation, and was by definition bad. Right? Any innovation is considered bid'ah, and that's bad to the point of being sinful and heretical. Right? So if you're preaching now a religion of Salafia that says any innovation is bad, is sinful, is heresy, you can see where this might lead. Okay? But this was Ibn Taymiyyah's writings in the late 1200s. He died in 1328. So this is when he's writing. We sort of don't hear from him again, but he resurfaces in modern times. And he's the go-to guy. Right? For all of these groups, they trace themselves back to the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah. So understanding what he's saying, the Salaf is the role model, those first couple generations. They're infallible guides, and any change from their model is bid'ah and has to be avoided at any means. Right? So, so much for Ibn Taymiyyah. So now I'm going to zoom forward about 500 years to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Tamimi. That's about half of his name, but okay. Everybody knows him as, his friends all called him Wahhab, or Al-Wahhab. The giver, the servant of the giver is what it means, Abdul Wahhab, the giver being God. He was in the Arabian Peninsula. He was a thinker. He was very influential. He really is responsible for the, what do you call it, rejuvenation or the rediscovery of Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, he was writing in the early 1700s, which is really the very beginning of European expansion into the Arab world, right? The Turkish Empire had lost Vienna, or had failed to take Vienna. They were being pushed back into the Balkans. We're right at the beginning of the colonial period. And he's sitting in the Arabian Peninsula in the middle of the desert, and he's feeling this collapse and this kind of driving in of the Arab world. And he is reading Ibn Taymiyyah, and he says, wow, this is our problem. And he starts to preach in Arabia a kind of Ibn Taymiyyah puritanical Islam. I'll give you the words here because they're all kind of important for how he, and the way he interpreted Ibn Taymiyyah is the interpretation that we hear nowadays. Here's the story, okay? Go back to Muhammad, he says. Muhammad is from here, from Saudi Arabia, right from where I'm from. The Arabs were weak. They didn't control anything. They were being pushed by the outside. They were getting poorer and poorer. And why? Because what Muhammad found was the Arabs weren't worshiping God, Allah, which, by the way, is not a name, it just means the God. They weren't worshiping Allah, they were worshiping this deity and that goddess and this fetish, and they were fighting each other, and they were all over the place. And Muhammad came with God's call to bring the Arabs back into unity. Tawhid. This is God's big thing, right? Unity. That they should all be worshiping the one God, that it was a one God, and should stop fighting among each other, and unite under the Word of God, which was their original inheritance from Abraham. And then they would prosper. And if you look back at the history of Islam, that's exactly what happened, right? They all unite under Muhammad, they all become Muslims, and 20 years later, they're one of the world's great empires, right? The period up to Muhammad is called Jahiliyyah, which means something like ignorance or forgetfulness or kind of unawareness. So the Arabs had forgotten their heritage. They had drifted away. They were in ignorance. Muhammad brings them back the true knowledge of God. And when they gave up Jahiliyyah and became Muslims, things got better. One of the things that he brought back was Tawhid, this idea of oneness. And also the idea that once you became Muslim, you had to give up all of your local little tribal gods and goddesses and fetishes and demons and this and that and worshiping whoever. Because then you're associating things with God. That's called shirk. And if you're associating something with God, you're what? It's no longer unity, right? So if you're going to have true unity, you can't have other things. So shirk was really bad. What he was saying is today in Saudi Arabia, we have drifted back into Jahiliyyah. And now we have to replay the tape. We have to go through the whole Muhammad experience all over again to become a great empire. So we have to give up all these other un-Muhammad things. And he meant like the Shiites, like the Sufis, like non-practicing Sunnis, and get ourselves back to the pure community, strict, you can underline that if you're taking notes, strict adherence to the Quran. He was not very popular, but he did end up making an alliance with a local tribe, which probably saved his life, and that was the Saud tribe. All right? As things developed, the Saud clan, it really wasn't a tribe, it was a clan, the Saud clan eventually took over that part of Arabia, and throughout the 19th century gathered more and more land. And after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1920, it ended up taking over the whole peninsula. And so we have Saudi Arabia. Well, when the Saudi clan took over, and Saudi Arabia, you know, is a kingdom, but it's the royal possession of the kings of the Saudi clan. Their religion was Wahhabism. That was their Islam. And they took it upon themselves. Hey, they became from a sort of unheard of little clan in the middle of nowhere to the rulers of all of Arabia. And then they discovered oil, right? So they became wealthy, they became powerful. It's exactly what Ibn Taymiyyah and Abdul Wahhab had said, right? So the Saudis, as part of their being, just their self-identity, sought upon themselves to spread Wahhabism, this very strict, puritanical view of Islam. And, you know, we all know now about the madrasas and the schools they're founding, but for the Saudis, this is kind of the key. This is how we get back into being a world power. And for them, it's not about power. It probably is, but, you know, it's about doing God's will. And so that's the point. So Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab then has come back as a major thinker, even though he was really nothing back then. But he's become the, let's say, the chaplain, as it were, of Saudi Arabia. Okay? So now let me talk about a couple of the current groups, and I'll link them back into Ibn Taymiyyah and to Abdul Wahhab. And you'll see these groups are quite different. One is Al-Qaeda. I start with Al-Qaeda because he's from Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was a Wahhabi, right? That's just part of being Saudi Arabian.